and made of silk and steel. Chapter 6. Here, hungry? Peter asked the whining black pit bull in the back, body twisting in his seat with a piece of jerky held out. He showed absolutely no fear as those large jaws snapped up the tasty meat. Instead, Peter giggled. Good boy, Max. Max whined again, licking the boy's fingers eagerly. In the driver's seat, Frank clicked down the heating a notch as they crossed the state line into North Carolina. Though the boy had said he was cold when they were still in New York, he hadn't seemed to feel the same discomfort any other child would on a chilly November evening without even a coat on. Did it even shiver? The kid also slept like the dead, passing out cold almost from the moment he got into the truck without waking until the sun had already risen, and he ate like a horse, cramming an entire Big Mac into his face with fries. He'd hardly believed Karen when she told him this scrawny little kid was actually as strong as a grown man, but now he thought she might be onto something. From the corner of his vision, Frank could see Peter's eyes scan the sign, Welcome to Tennessee. Where are we going, Mr. Castle? Frank resisted the urge to snort, Mr. Castle. If this kid got any more like Murdoch, he'd have horns, for Christ's sake. Absolutely nowhere. Huh? Ain't going anywhere, kid. That's the point, he told Peter gruffly. If we don't have any set destination or travel pattern, it will be harder for anybody to track us down. Got it? Yeah, I think so. Peter swallowed and looked down at his lap, fidgeting with the straw in the soda they'd gotten at a McDonald's drive-thru, with a Peter sleeping/hiding beneath Frank's coat so that nobody would be able to get a clear look at his face. Do my mom and dad know where I am? I have no idea, Frank said honestly. With a quick glance at him, left Karen a message that said, I picked you up just like she asked, but I don't know whether she told your parents or not. Brightening, Peter asked, could I call her? Or Uncle Foggy? Nope, he said flatly, and Peter's enthusiasm dampened considerably. We're going dark until she leaves me a message that it's safe to take you back. How will she do that? Karen's got her ways, he murmured cryptically. Karen tripped over the welcome mat in the darkened hallway of her empty apartment, cursing under her breath as she nearly face-planted straight into the opposite wall. Her makeup had basically melted from her face hours ago. She hadn't had any decent sleep in nearly 72 hours, and her stomach was tied up in knots all the time. Her feet were aching, her neck was sore, and her poor little guy was still being held hostage by a freaking lunatic. After locking the door and wrestling her heels off, she stumped down the hallway and flopped directly onto her bed without bothering to take the rest of her clothes off or even brush her teeth. She slept. 4 hours later, Karen rolled over and nearly rolled off the bed entirely, yelping as she caught herself before her elbow slammed into the ground. She vaguely recalled her dreams, uneasy nightmares filled with being chased by something she couldn't see or get away from. But no clear images stuck with her now that she was fully awake. Grumbling incoherently, she pushed herself out of the bed and finally brushed her teeth and made herself some very strong coffee, stronger than Jessica, blacker than Luke, and more Irish than the entire Nelson clan kind of coffee. With her mouth no longer feeling as though something foul had died there, she stumbled to the kitchen and froze as her eyes processed what she was seeing. The kitchen as a whole looked suspiciously neater. Not in an obvious way, it wasn't like her kitchen was generally a mess, but the counters looked like they'd been wiped down and everything was just a little straighter and more put together than Karen usually left it. Okay, she murmured aloud, slowly turning in a circle around the middle of the room. Okay, I'm listening. So, where did you put it? Karen had to scan the room, not quite daring to touch anything until she located whatever message Frank had left for her. At first glance, she scowled, unable to see what he was pointing her toward. And then she realized that the towel she normally left hanging over the handle of the stove was now draped over the edge of the drawer she kept the utensils in. Instinctively, she held her breath as she opened the drawer, cautiously pawing through the contents. A weak, choked off laugh escaped her as Karen held up a little silver keychain with a baby blue rattle dangling from the end. "It's the boy," it said in a cheerful yellow bubble script. Tears ran down her face as she slid down the fridge, rattle clutched in her fist. For the first time since she'd seen Salinger standing next to Peter, she felt able to take a deep breath. Peter was safe. "He said this afternoon," Trish said slowly, clutching her phone as she stared at the message illuminated over the screen. "In public, probably so you can't beat the shit out of him again." Jess snorted. "Didn't help him the first time. But alright, I'll bite. Where and when?" Trish's eyelids flickered. "In an hour, in front of..." "He says it's only a few blocks away from here." Her nose wrinkled. "Ugh, that means he's still watching you. Anyway, he wants to meet you in front of Clinton Church in an hour." She was startled when Matt, Peter's nice level-headed father, suddenly hissed and bared his teeth angrily. "Son of a bitch!" Foggy hummed thoughtfully. "That's playing such dirty pool, man. Wow." "Why?" Eric asked, leaning back, coffee in hand. He was lucky Karen wasn't here to make it yet. "What's at Clinton Church?" He didn't want to say anything about it directly because it wasn't relevant or helpful, but Matt's presence was no longer the soothing relaxer that it used to be. Harmless blind lawyer must be having a lot of not-so-harmless thoughts, and for Eric, it felt like having his skull bashed in with a crowbar. Jessica wasn't even having this effect on him right now, and she'd been the one to actually thrash the guy yesterday. Matt's hands clenched, white-knuckled on his cane, jaw flexing rather impressively before he said, "Clinton Church is where I attend Mass. Whenever I find the time, and Peter's grandmother, my mother, works just next door." "Do you think he knows?" Jess whispered, so softly it was hardly more than moving her lips. It wouldn't matter, standing in the same room. Matt would know what she said, no matter how quietly her voice was pitched. Has he figured it out? Without speaking, Matt gave a tiny jerk of his head. No, he didn't think that Salinger had figured out that Peter's father also had superhuman abilities. Matt felt confidently certain that if Salinger did know, he wouldn't be able to resist being more overtly threatening. It just wasn't in his psychology. As far as any of them could tell, Salinger had the personal charm of a large, slimy lizard, only less cute. "Mr. Castle?" Cornfields sped past them, barren and lined with November frost. "Do you know Daredevil?" Peter was trying his best not to squirm around or babble, the way he knew he often did, but it was very hard. About every 2 hours or so, they stopped and got out so that Max could potty among the frozen ditches, and Mr. Castle let Peter throw him a tennis ball for a while. But even in school, he didn't generally spend this much time sitting still. "We've met," Frank grunted, and at first Peter thought that was all he was getting, until Frank also said, "He and I didn't really see eye to eye, but Red's a good kid." A bit wistfully, Peter said, "Do you think something's happened to him? I was hoping I could see him now that I live in his neighborhood, but he's been missing for weeks." He watched the empty field, rows of hulled down dead corn stalks standing stiff even in the cold winter wind, and felt an eerie chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Desperately, he wished for his mother, maybe Mary Parker, with her wispy hair and soft hands, maybe Jess with her gossamer smiles and leather boots. He wasn't sure. He wasn't certain that it mattered right now. I hope he's okay. Frank glanced at him, a hint of sympathy reaching his stern face. He could see the homesickness on his eyes. Brown, just like Red's. This is a real mess of a situation you've gotten yourself into, Murdoch. Christ, and people think I've got mental problems. He did, but that wasn't the point. Frank pulled a newspaper from the top of the dashboard, plopping it straight into Peter's lap. Looks pretty alive to me. Peter gaped at the headline in front of him, complete with the grainy CCTV image of a man in a horned helmet standing inside some random alley. Hell hath no fury, the paper shrieked. It was a national paper, but this wasn't on the front page. The devil has returned to New York City, Peter read out loud, brow furrowed. Beginning late Friday night, the devil of Hell's Kitchen, the so-called daredevil, has returned after weeks of absence, and it appears that the aptly named devil has brought a new fury to the district. An officer in the precinct was quoted as saying that he's never seen the unknown vigilante so worked up before. He's always gave the more unsavory characters reason to reconsider their lifestyle, Officer Nichols said archly. But this time we were picking up guys who were literally gibbering with terror. I don't know what it is, but the devil's mad, and I think if he doesn't get what he wants from these little outings, we're all gonna pay for it. Peter put the paper down, looking troubled as he bit his lip. He doesn't sound very okay, Mr. Castle. Frank looked over at the boy and sighed inaudibly at his large, sad eyes. Jesus, Karen was right. This kid was adult kryptonite. He'd bet that Red was losing his damn mind right now, assuming that Karen hadn't yet told him about Peter's current whereabouts. He would be, if it were him, worse even. I imagine he ain't too pleased to hear somebody's been snatching kids straight out of his neighborhood, Frank said finally. It had the benefit of at least being quite true. Personal connections aside, he was all too sure that Red would not appreciate being told that some jack-off was stealing children because they were special. Much nicer than the word Salinger would probably use, but that was still Karen's words, not Frank's. Peter went back to staring at the paper in thoughtful silence, which was unusual for him in and of itself. Not the thoughtfulness, the silence, and that was a whole other thing. If he ever got back into contact with Red after this whole scenario, Frank was gonna have to tell him to find a way to get this kid to lighten up. Children should not be this serious and contemplative. Maybe Uncle Luke told him, Peter reasoned aloud, glancing over at him. Jess said he knows Daredevil. Luke knows Daredevil. Not for the first time, Frank resisted the urge to start mouthing, Jess said, what the to himself when Peter was facing away. Yeah. We're all in the same frigging club. He sighed, rolling his eyes. We all got screwed over by someone who decided to ruin our lives. Probably how your mom got to be a member too. What do you mean? Peter asked in a small voice. Jess, what do you mean Jess is in your club? Oh, they literally did not tell this child anything, did they? I mean, Frank hedged. trying to squirm his way out of giving up the secret his parents had clearly tried to avoid telling him. That sometimes bad people do things, hurt people, and sometimes the people they hurt find ways to hurt them back, that's all. Oh, his brows scrunched together. You mean like the man who was with her when I was a baby? Like that? Jess said there was a bad man with her, and she was afraid that he would hurt me. Frank scratched at his neck. I suppose so, yeah. He was a nasty piece of work, too. A power like that? He whistled. Girl's lucky she made it out alive. Peter froze in his chair. What? A power? Why did he get the responsibility of teaching this child the hard facts of reality? And where the hell were his useless parents when he needed them? Frank drummed on the steering wheel. Screw it, this wasn't a secret he was bothering to keep. Yeah, kid, that man was kinda, you know, what a hostage is. He waited for Peter to nod slowly before continuing. He was sort of holding your mom hostage. He had special powers, and he could make anyone who heard his voice do what he wanted, even if what he was asking for could hurt them or make them real sad. He was a monster, a real-life, honest-to-God monster. He stopped himself from going any further, seeing the chalky color of Peter's face, though Frank's impression about why Peter's face looked so stricken was mistaken. She stopped him, though, otherwise he'd be on my list. She's gonna hate me, he thought, frantically resisting the urge to chew at his fingernails. I can't tell her I have powers. She's gonna think I'm a monster, just like the bad man. Did she kill him? Peter squeaked, clutching his seat nervously. Again, Frank was mistaken about the motives behind the question. Thinking that Peter was afraid of Kilgrave, he quickly said, Yeah, kid, your mom took care of him. Frank sighed, giving an angry shake of the head. Not before a lot of bad things happened before that. Or so I've heard. Made this poor girl shoot her own parents. Poor kid. She killed herself just to get away from him. A glance over at Peter made Frank close his mouth with a clink of teeth. Shit, that was too much. Going too far. Maybe the Rugrats chatterbox trait was clearly rubbing off on him. The kid looked like he'd seen a ghost. Peter sat stiffly in his seat, wishing the world would swallow him whole. That man was evil, and his mother had killed him to stop him from hurting any more people. What would she do when she realized that Peter was just like him? Because Jessica wanted Matt and Trish kept away from Salinger, though for different reasons, and Eric obviously had to be kept away from him, Jess decided to bring Luke with her, both because he would be a good third-party witness and also if she lost her temper, Luke was one of the few people who could not only talk her down, but physically stop her. If it came to that, and he was level-headed enough not to just let her beat Salinger to a pulp, the way Danny or Colleen might. Hell, Colleen would probably help. So it was Luke. As not good as Jess knew this meeting was going to end up going, her sixth sense rang a loud alarm bell at the sight of Salinger, face bandaged with both eyes blackened and his right arm in both a cast-end sling. Did you get hit by a frickin' truck? She asked bluntly. Salinger glowered at her and at Luke, glaring at the other man with his eyes nearly swollen shut. You can thank your little hellspawn for this, he croaked. The monster nearly killed me. Jess froze, trembling slightly in place. What did you do? She whispered, hands clenching and unclenching. Luke caught her as she tried to lunge forward, fingers clawed as they reached for Salinger's face, and she repeated it, this time as a howling scream. What did you do? What did I do? Salinger shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. I could have him locked away for this, Jones. Your sweet little angel broke my nose and 3 of the bones in my hand. After dislocating my shoulder. He's never hurt anyone before. Jessica snarled, teeth bared savagely, watching his pleasure as he flinched as once again. Luke had to hold her back. He's strong enough to knock down a grown man, and he's never done anything to hurt someone. What did you do to him? My property, Miss Jones, he said crisply, lips pursed. Where's my son? She demanded. Salinger held out his hand impatiently. Without saying a word, though, his meaning was clear. No photos, no Peter. She narrowed her eyes at him. And how do I know you'll give me the real location? I want an escort to your hideaway, Gregory. He raised his brows. That's a surprise, because I think you might want to hurry. Her jaw dropped open. What? Salinger gritted his teeth. My property, Miss Jones, and not a moment sooner. She shoved the album into his chest, ready to tear the location from his big dumb mouth if necessary. Where? Calm, patient now that he had acquired all her leverage, Salinger blinked his pale lizard eyes at her, stuffing the album into his messenger bag. I have no idea. Repeat that? Jess growled, grabbing him by the front of his shirt and listening to his gasp of pain as his arm was jostled. She shook him. Repeat that. He ran away. Salinger wheezed, bug-eyed in terror. Even Luke's eyes went wide. Oh, he breathed. You're a dead man. End of chapter.